Hello and welcome back to Brain Booster, the channel that is all about expanding your knowledge and giving you the tools to think critically about important issues. In today's video, we will be discussing one of the worst industrial disasters in history, the Bhopal disaster. This tragic event took place in Bhopal, India, on the night of December 2–3, 1984, and claimed the lives of thousands of people. The Bhopal disaster or Bhopal gas tragedy was a chemical accident on the night of the 2nd to the 3rd of December 1984 at the Union Carbide India Limited (UCIL) pesticide plant in Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh, India. Considered the world's worst industrial disaster, over 500,000 people in the small towns around the plant were exposed to the highly toxic gas methyl isocyanate, MIC. Estimates vary on the death toll, with the official number of immediate deaths being 2,259. Others estimate that 8,000 died within 2 weeks, and another 8,000 or more have since died from gas-related diseases. Chapter 1 Background. The UCIL factory was built in 1969 to produce the pesticide 7-UCC's brand name for carbaryl, using methyl isocyanate, MIC, as an intermediate. An MIC production plant was added to the UCIL site in 1979. The chemical process employed in the Bhopal plant had methylamine reacting with phosgene to form MIC, which was in turn reacted with 1-naphthol to form the final product, carbaryl. Another manufacturer, Bayer, also used this MIC intermediate process at the chemical plant once owned by UCC at Institute, West Virginia, in the United States. In the early 1980s, although the demand for pesticides had fallen, production continued regardless, leading to an accumulation of stores of unused MIC at the Bhopal site. Chapter 2 Leakage and its effect. The Bhopal UCIL facility housed 3 underground 68,000-liter, 18,000 US gal, liquid MIC storage tanks, E610, E611, and E619. In the months leading up to the December leak, liquid MIC production was in progress and being used to fill these tanks. UCC safety regulations specified that no one tank should be filled more than 50%, here, 30 tons, with liquid MIC. Each tank was pressurized with inert nitrogen gas. This pressurization allowed liquid MIC to be pumped out of each tank as needed, and also kept impurities and moisture out of the tanks. In late October 1984, Tank E610 lost the ability to effectively contain most of its nitrogen gas pressure, which meant that the liquid MIC contained within could not be pumped out. At the time of this failure, Tank E610 contained 42 tons of liquid MIC. Shortly after this failure, MIC production was halted at the Bhopal facility, and parts of the plant were shut down for maintenance. Maintenance included the shutdown of the plant's flare tower so that a corroded pipe could be repaired. 17. With the flare tower still rendered useless, production of carbaryl was resumed in late November, using MIC stored in the 2 tanks still in service. An attempt to re-establish pressure in tank E610 on the 1st of December failed, so the 42 tons of liquid MIC contained within still could not be pumped out of it. Chapter 3 Gas Leak. By early December 1984, most of the plant's MIC-related safety systems were malfunctioning and many valves and lines were in poor condition. In addition, several vent gas scrubbers had been out of service as well as the steam boiler, intended to clean the pipes. During the late evening hours of the 2nd of December 1984, water was believed to have entered tank E610 via a side pipe during attempts to unclog it. The tank still contained the 42 tons of MIC that had been there since late October. When the tea break concluded at 12:40 a.m., the reaction in tank E610 skyrocketed to a critical state at an alarming speed within 5 minutes. Temperatures in the tank were off the scale, maxed out beyond 25 degrees Celsius, 77 degrees Fahrenheit, and the pressure in the tank was indicated at 280 kilopascals, 40 psi. One employee witnessed a concrete slab above tank E610 crack as the emergency relief valve burst open, and pressure in the tank continued to increase to 380 kilopascals, 55 psi. This despite atmospheric venting of toxic MIC gas having begun. Direct atmospheric venting should have been prevented or at least partially mitigated by at least 3 safety devices which were malfunctioning, not in use, insufficiently sized or otherwise rendered inoperable. About 30 tons of mic escaped from the tank into the atmosphere in 45 to 60 minutes. This would increase to 40 tons within 2 hours. The gases were blown in a southeast direction over Bhopal. A UCIL employee triggered the plant's alarm system at 12:50 a.m. as the concentration of gas in and around the plant became difficult to tolerate. Activation of the system triggered 2 siren alarms. One that specifically sounded inside the UCIL plant itself, and a second directed to the exterior, which would alert the general public and the city of Bhopal. The 2 siren systems had been decoupled from one another in 1982, so that it was possible to leave the factory warning siren on while the public one remained inactive. Most city residents who were exposed to the mic gas were first made aware of the leak by exposure to the gas itself, or by opening their doors to investigate commotion, rather than having been instructed to shelter in place, or to evacuate before the arrival of the gas in the first place. Chapter 4: Acute Effects. The initial effects of exposure were coughing, severe eye irritation and a feeling of suffocation, burning in the respiratory tract, blepharospasm, breathlessness, stomach pains and vomiting. People awakened by these symptoms fled from the plant. Those who ran inhaled more than those in vehicles. Owing to their height, children and other residents of shorter stature inhaled higher concentrations, as methyl isocyanate gas is approximately twice as dense as air and, therefore, in an open environment has a tendency to fall toward the ground. Thousands of people had died by the following morning. Primary causes of deaths were choking, reflexogenic circulatory collapse and pulmonary edema. Findings during autopsies revealed changes not only in the lungs but also cerebral edema, tubular necrosis of the kidneys, fatty degeneration of the liver and necrotizing enteritis. The individuals who did not die were exposed to cancers, blindness, loss of livelihood, and financial strain. Chapter 5: Immediate Aftermath. In the immediate aftermath, the plant was closed to outsiders, including UCC, by the Indian government, which subsequently failed to make data public, contributing to the confusion. The initial investigation was conducted entirely by the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR, and the Central Bureau of Investigation. The UCC chairman and CEO Warren Anderson, together with a technical team, immediately traveled to India. Upon arrival, Anderson was placed under house arrest and urged by the Indian government to leave the country within 24 hours. Within a few days, trees in the vicinity became barren, and bloated animal carcasses had to be disposed of. 170,000 people were treated at hospitals and temporary dispensaries, and 2,000 buffalo, goats, and other animals were collected and buried. Supplies, including food, became scarce owing to suppliers' safety fears. Fishing was prohibited, causing further supply shortages. 5. Lacking any safe alternative, on the 16th of December, tanks 611 and 619 were emptied of the remaining mic by reactivating the plant and continuing the manufacture of pesticide. Despite safety precautions such as having water-carrying helicopters continually overflying the plant, this led to a second mass evacuation from Bhopal. The government of India passed the Bhopal Gas Leak Disaster Act, that gave the government rights to represent all victims, whether or not in India. Complaints of lack of information or misinformation were widespread. Chapter 6: Subsequent Legal Action. Legal proceedings involving UCC, the United States and Indian governments, local Bhopal authorities, and the disaster victims started immediately after the catastrophe. The Indian government passed the Bhopal Gas Leak Act in March 1985, allowing the Government of India to act as the legal representative for victims of the disaster, leading to the beginning of legal proceedings. Initial lawsuits were generated in the United States federal court system. On the 17th of April 1985, Federal District Court Judge John F. Keenan, overseeing one lawsuit, suggested that fundamental human decency required Union Carbide to provide between $5 million and $10 million to immediately help the injured, and suggested the money could be quickly distributed through the International Red Cross. UCC, on the notion that doing so did not constitute an admission of liability and the figure could be credited toward any future settlement or judgment, offered a $5 million relief fund 2 days later. 37. The Indian government turned down the offer. The government of India refused the offer from Union Carbide and claimed $3.3 billion United States dollars. The Indian Supreme Court told both sides to come to an agreement and start with a clean slate in November 1988. Eventually, in an out-of-court settlement reached in February 1989, Union Carbide agreed to pay $470 million for damages caused in the Bhopal disaster. The amount was immediately paid. Throughout 1990, the Indian Supreme Court heard appeals against the settlement. In October 1991, the Supreme Court upheld the original $470 million, dismissing any other outstanding petitions that challenged the original decision. The court ordered the Indian government to purchase, out of settlement fund, a group medical insurance policy to cover 100,000 persons who may later develop symptoms, and cover any shortfall in the settlement fund. It also requested UCC and its subsidiary UCIL voluntarily fund a hospital in Bhopal at an estimated $17 million to specifically treat victims of the Bhopal disaster. The company agreed to this. Chapter 7 Long-Term Health Effect. A total of 36 wards were marked by the authorities as being gas-affected, affecting a population of 520,000. Of these, 200,000 were below 15 years of age, and 3,000 were pregnant women. The official immediate death toll was 2,259, and in 1991, 3,928 deaths had been officially certified. Ingrid Eckerman estimated 8,000 died within 2 weeks. The government of Madhya Pradesh confirmed a total of 3,787 deaths related to the gas release. Later, the affected area was expanded to include 700,000 citizens. A government affidavit in 2006 stated the leak caused 558,125 injuries, including 38,478 temporary partial injuries and approximately 3,900 severely and permanently disabling injuries. A cohort of 80,021 exposed people was registered, along with a control group, a cohort of 15,931 people from areas not exposed to mic. Nearly every year since 1986, they have answered the same questionnaire. It shows excess mortality and morbidity in the exposed group. Bias and confounding factors cannot be excluded from the study. Because of migration and other factors, 75% of the cohort is lost, as the ones who move out are not followed. A number of clinical studies are performed. The quality varies, but the different reports support each other. Studied and reported long-term health effects are eyes, chronic conjunctivitis, scars on cornea, corneal opacities, early cataracts; respiratory tracts, obstructive and/or restrictive disease, pulmonary fibrosis, aggravation of tuberculosis and chronic bronchitis; neurological system, impairment of memory, finer motor skills, numbness, etc. Psychological problems, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Children's health, peri and neonatal death rates increased. Failure to grow, intellectual impairment, etc. Missing or insufficient fields for research are female reproduction, chromosomal aberrations, cancer, immune deficiency, neurological sequelae, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and children born after the disaster. Late cases that might never be highlighted are respiratory insufficiency, cardiac insufficiency, cor pulmonale, cancer and tuberculosis. Bhopal now has high rates of birth defects and records a miscarriage rate 7x higher than the national average. Chapter 8 Sabotage Theory by Dow Chemicals. Now owned by Dow Chemical Company, Union Carbide maintains a website dedicated to the tragedy and claims that the accident was the result of sabotage, stating that sufficient safety systems were in place and operative to prevent the intrusion of water. The Union Carbide commissioned Arthur D. Little report concluded that it was likely that a single employee secretly and deliberately introduced a large amount of water into the mic tank by removing a meter and connecting a water hose directly to the tank through the metering port. UCC claims the plant staff falsified numerous records to distance themselves from the accident and absolve themselves of blame, and that the Indian government impeded its investigation and declined to prosecute the employee responsible, presumably because it would weaken its allegations of negligence by Union Carbide. The evidence advanced by UCC alleged to support this hypothesis. A key witness testified that when he entered the control room at 12:15 a.m., prior to the disaster, the atmosphere was tense and quiet. Another key witness, the instrument supervisor, testified that when he arrived at the scene immediately following the accident, he noticed that the local pressure indicator on the critical tank 610 was missing, and that he had found a hose lying next to the empty manhead created by the missing pressure indicator, and that the hose had had water running out of it. This testimony was corroborated by other witnesses. Graphological analysis revealed major attempts to alter log files and destroy log evidence. Other log files show that the control team had attempted to purge 1 ton of material out of tank 610 immediately prior to the disaster. An attempt was then made to cover up this transfer via log alteration. Water is heavier than might, and the transfer line is attached to the bottom of the tank.